Hi, my name is Sage, and this week, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I posted a poll, and then it was tied, so then I posted another poll, and I now have an answer. I'm gonna be making a snake that steals gems, and to get started, I'm gonna need some wire. And I'm gonna take that wire and make it look like a snake by coiling it up a little bit and just making it more snake-like. And then I cover it with tin foil, and then the tin foil is all done, and then bam, I cover it with clay. So now that the base is ready for me to carve, I then take a rolling pin and start to smooth it out. You may be like, Sage, that's a little dramatic, don't you think? I wanted it to be smoother, and if I were to take my ball stylus and do that, it leaves like little dents on the sides of where my ball stylus is gonna be, so I just thought, you know what? Rolling pin. And then here I accidentally carved in a smiley face, and I thought that was gonna be for good luck, that everything is gonna go a-okay on the first try. I took it as a sign and I shouldn't have. But that's for later me to worry about. Right now I'm using the ball stylus to give his belly scale some texture. Next, I take some more clay and add it to his chubby cheeks. At least that's what I'm trying to convey. Before then taking the rolling pin and flattening out his head and then giving him some eye sockets. And no, eye sockets are complete without some brows. So I give him some little eyebrows and blend them in. And honestly, everything's going pretty good so far, right? And nothing too crazy is happening with the eyes yet. But first, I have to give him some nostrils, and I also give him a little smile while I'm at it too with the pointy stylus. Next, I roll a couple spheres for his eyes, and honestly, one of them is good on the first try. The other one, I need to fix it real quick, but it works. And you may be like, Sage, that's not too crazy at all. Just wait until later. But now that the eyes are complete, I move on to making his little mask, because every thief needs a mask. And to do that, I take some clay and my ball stylus and make more of like an hourglass shape, and then I put it on his face and it kind of looks like sunglasses, and that's not the vibe I'm going for. So then I'm back at it again. So now I take my pointy stylus and carve in some little holes for the eyes, before then taking my ball stylus and making them even bigger, because obviously he has to see through them because he's a thief. And the first time I do it, I'm a little off on one eye, but then I take my handy dandy rolling pin and everything works out. And once he can see out of his mask, I am happy, but then I'm not happy at all because the too much gene takes over, and then I decide I don't like the edges of his mask anymore, so I'm gonna mess with them, and I should have just left them. They were fine, but they weren't in my brain. But then I move on to getting some tin foil and folding it up and making it into a little rectangle, before then bam, covering that rectangle and making a little bag shape, as this is going to be his thieving bag. And so I cover it with clay, and it's looking a little rough on the edges, so I take my rolling pin, and I also use other methods like smushing it into the mat and just trying to make it smoother. And once it's smooth enough, I move on to making the straps, because obviously his backpack, he doesn't have any shoulders, right? So I'm gonna give him a belt on his backpack, so it's kind of like a fanny pack for thieves. And so once I roll out some clay and flatten it out, I then carve out a little rectangle piece, before then bam, making two, and I put one of the belt pieces onto the snake, before then smushing on the backpack slash fanny pack on the back of him, before then taking the other rectangle and putting it on the front, as this will be the belt that like flaps out to make it look like a belt, you know what I mean? After that, I take my ball stylus and poke in some belt holes, because you know, belts have holes. And no belt is complete without the belt buckle, so I roll some little hot dogs and I make the little doohickey to secure the belt as well, and I put all of those on, and bam, I have a belt buckle now. But I'm noticing that the bag feels a little flimsy on his back because there's really nothing holding it up. It was just me smushing it in, so I add some extra clay on the sides of it just to make sure that it's nice and sturdy, before then rolling out even more clay with the rolling pin in, as this will be the flap part of the bag. But I do end up adding more clay to it because I think it was too small, but now I can start to carve it out to make it more like of a U shape, and then I blend it into the bag. And then I get distracted and add a little button on the bottom of the bag, and then on the flap I carve out a little circle because then the bag can be secured. And speaking of it being secured, I then work on making some gems, and this takes me a long time because I didn't realize making straight edges are so hard. I don't do that normally. So with all these little spherical balls of clay, there's no tinfoil or anything in them. I'm just using a spatula tool to kind of carve out the straight edges before I realize there's a better way to do this. I can take the actual carving tools that I have with like the little loops and stuff, so I can just do straight edges like that, and that really helped the process move along. Even though I already did some off screen, as you could tell, but now I have to make a big gem that he's gonna hold on the end of his tail because obviously he needs to hold something too. He's stealing. And so with this gem, I make it a lot longer because I feel like it would be easier for him to hold a longer gem, and I end up carving it out and then twisting it so it's nice and swirly because I think that's fun and it gives it a different texture than all the other gems. And I think it would also imply that this one was carved, so maybe it's worth more. But now that all the gems are carved, I move on to making the scales, and I do that by cutting a cardboard straw and digging it into the clay to make little scale markings, right? But then the cardboard just folded in on itself, and I was hitting the tinfoil underneath, but I've used this method before on my other snakes, so I end up taking a plastic straw and doing the exact same thing, and it ended up working a lot better. But since it's not as thick, the imprints are very thin and dainty. And since the imprints are so different, I end up just smoothing out the snake and going over it again, but with the plastic straw instead. And this is my first time using a plastic straw to make scales, and just the number one thing that I'm noticing is it's a little bit harder to make it look like a scale compared to just an imprint of a scale because of how thin it is. So I really have to get in there and like lift up the scale compared to the cardboard, which is thicker, so it just did it automatically. But besides that, everything is still relatively the same, but the too much gene does take a hold of me and I end up redoing some parts because I'm crazy. But that's enough about the scales. I end up doing everything else bam off screen, and then from here on out I'm just doing touch-ups, but I do touch-ups everywhere. So on the scales and on his head and even on his belt buckle strap until bam, he looks like this. So now he can be put into the oven, and bam, he's out of the oven and everything's all nice and baked. There is a crack near the bag, but that's okay. I'm gonna cover it with paint. And speaking of paint, I'm gonna paint him purple. This is the first layer, and I just thought purple is a good color. You know, I've been in a purple and pink mood. As you know, if you watch my shorts, I drew this week as well. But then I bam, paint a second coat of purple, and while I wait for this to dry, I move on to painting his mask, and I paint it black because, you know, he's a thief. His identity needs to be masked. No one knows who this snake is, but what they do know is that he can accessorize because his backpack is also gonna be black, and so is the belt holding his backpack slash fanny pack. And once the first layer of that is done, I move on to painting his belly scales, and I go for a lighter purple color because you know what goes with purple? Even more purple. And since I believe that this snake would be a good thief, I'm giving him gold embellishments on his backpack slash fanny pack because obviously he's a rich thief. And speaking of rich thief, obviously he got some gold gems too because why not? And I'm also gonna give him a pink gem and some silver gems. And this is just the first layer of paint. I'm gonna be painting them sporadically, so this is gonna be the last time you're gonna see me paint them because otherwise it's just layering and that's boring. So now I'm gonna paint the scales, and for this part of the scale painting process, I jump back and forth between using a dark purple and a light purple to try and cover up any of the white that has been left over from the first two layers not getting it. And this is what it looks like up close. It's looking like a little bit of a hot mess right now, but that's okay. I'm just trying to fill everything in with the paint, trying to get all of the hard to reach nooks and crannies took forever, but it was fun using different purples and eventually pinks to paint the scales. I then let that dry before then moving on to the belly scales yet again, and for the nooks and crannies of the belly scales, I go in with a black, but I'm noticing I'm getting black a little bit everywhere, so I end up just doing some shading on each of the belly scales individually to make it just a little bit darker on the edges and lighter in the middle. And remember how I said I was gonna be painting the gems off screen in between all of that? Turns out I got completely distracted, so bam, I paint the gems now as well as the belt buckle because, well, I forgot. And since the gems need to be in his bag, I take the Gorilla Glue, not sponsored, and Gorilla Glue each one of them into the bag. But the Gorilla Gluing doesn't stop there, I also need to Gorilla Glue the long gem. And so I do that. And once it's adhered, I move on to painting the eyes. And do you remember at the beginning of the video, well, at least close to it, I said just wait until later? Well, it's later. I painted the first layer of yellow, let that dry, and now I'm painting the iris, right? Nothing too crazy. But then I'm noticing there's white surrounding the eye, and I'm thinking, you know what? I can be careful with my paint, and I can paint it without getting anything on the yellow. But then I start to panic and paint over the yellow because I got paint on it, and then everything is now a yellow murky mess. So then I take a paper towel and try and scrape it off because it's still wet, so I'm thinking it could work. And then it did for the most part, so then I take a yellow and gold mixture and paint over that. And I do a few layers off screen, so now it looks like this. And then I re-add in the irises. So basically what I'm trying to say here is just let the paint dry and don't do what I did. This all could have been avoided so easily. And then after that, I just do random touch-ups everywhere, and that's the craft. And I would like to say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now it's time for the glamour shots.